Watch this video in Lesson Reach. Pause and ask questions, take a quiz, or get help with assignments. Link below.
Have you ever, phrased a thought perfectly in your head, but when it finally comes out of your mouth, the other person just totally misunderstands the logic behind it? Or worse, they actually take offense?
Oh, yeah. Communication is just an absolute minefield. Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We're so glad you're joining us.
Yeah, so glad to have you here.
And to sort of unpack this whole communication trap, we're looking at section 2.5 of chapter 2 from Contemporary Mathematics. And since this is, pretty heavy on formal logic, I'm going to be putting on my lecturer hat today.
Right, which makes me the curious student, I guess. And our mission today is exploring what section 2.5 calls equivalence statements.
Right.
The premise is just really fascinating.
It really is.
It's basically that the way you structure an argument completely dictates how it's received. Like, smart phrasing makes your point undeniable, while poor phrasing just makes people instantly defensive.
Exactly. And to understand how to, manipulate that phrasing, we really first have to look at what makes two statements logically equivalent. So it simply means their truth values always match. If one is true, the other is true. If one is false, the other is false.
Right. So if you map that out on a truth table and two statements just perfectly mirror each other in every possible scenario, that bulletproof link is what logic calls a tautology.
Right. You
Yeah.
got it. That's a tautology.
But I do have to push back a little bit here. I mean, how does matching up truth values on a chart actually help you or me when we're, in the middle of a heated conversation?
Well, it matters because it lets you totally rearrange your argument without actually breaking the underlying facts. So think about standard cause and effect, what the textbook calls a conditional statement, like if P, then Q.
Okay, so if it is raining, then the ground is wet.
Right. Perfect example. Now, let's look at the logical trap people immediately fall into with that.
Yeah.
They assume that if the ground is wet, it must be raining.
Oh, right. Yeah. They just flip the cause and effect. They say if Q, then P, which isn't actually true because, a sprinkler could have made the ground wet.
Exactly, the sprinkler. So that flawed flip is what we call the converse.
The converse.
And people fall for it all the time. They use it to manipulate arguments constantly, really. And they also try what's called the inverse, where they keep the original order, but they just make everything negative. So if it's not raining, the ground isn't wet.
Which is still logically broken because, again, the sprinkler exists.
Right.
So both the converse and the inverse completely change the actual truth of your original point.
They do. Which brings us to the big reveal of section 2.5. There is actually only one way to twist a conditional statement around so that it remains a tautology.
Oh, wait, really? Only one?
Only one where it's perfectly logically equivalent to the original. You have to use the contrapositive.
Okay, wait. The contrapositive. To get that, you swap the cause and effect and you make them both negative. Right. Let me actually try working this out with the example straight from the text. So the original statement is, if all dogs bark, then Lassie likes to bark.
Right. So to find the logically equivalent contrapositive, we flip the order and then negate both pieces.
Okay, so the conclusion becomes a negative hypothesis. Like, if Lassie does not like to bark, then some dogs do not bark. Oh, wow. Wait, if Lassie does not like to bark, then some dogs do not bark.
Yep. Logically, that means the exact same thing as if all dogs bark, then Lassie likes to bark.
That is wild because psychologically it just lands completely differently. Like the first version, if all dogs bark, it sounds like a sweeping generalization, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It instantly invites the listener to argue and try to find an exception.
People immediately want to prove it wrong.
Exactly. But then the contrapositive, if Lassie does not like to bark, it shifts the whole focus to one specific sympathetic counterexample. It just feels softer,
Right.
less defensive, even though the actual factual claim hasn't changed an inch.
Yeah, and that is precisely why mastering this matters so much for you as a listener. Because understanding these forms, it gives you the power to customize the psychological framing of your point for literally any audience.
Wow.
You can dodge their defensive triggers without ever compromising your facts.
It totally reframes how you listen to people out in the real world, too, especially when you see how often people weaponize the wrong logical flip. Actually, it leaves me thinking about one of the exercises at the very end of the chapter.
Oh, the Elvis one.
Yes, it gives this technically true statement. If Elvis wore a cape, then some superheroes wear capes.
Which is a fun, undeniably true conditional statement.
Right, but think about what happens when people mistakenly accept the converse of that statement as truth. They end up believing if some superheroes wear capes, then they are Elvis.
Which sounds totally ridiculous when you say it out loud like that.
It really does. But we fall for that exact logical leap all the time, don't we? In politics and marketing and arguments with friends, it really makes you wonder, how often are we being manipulated simply because someone intentionally blurred the lines between a sound conditional statement and its fundamentally broken converse?